It's the Full Force Movie News Burst, brought to you by GeneralsJoes Reborn.com with me, Christopher McLeod AKA Diagnostic 80. Joining me to discuss the recent news that Lorenzo Di Bonaventura has revealed plans regarding the Transformers G.I. Joe movie crossover is the General himself, Justin Generals Joes Bell. The movie has been out long enough now, but just in case, spoiler alert, there will be spoilers ahead for the Rise of the Beasts movie and possible spoilers for the next Transformers movie, so please switch off now if you don't want to know anything about it. So earlier today, which is actually Thursday as we record this, Transformers Rise of the Beast producer Lorenzo Di Bonaventura revealed in an interview with One Take News that the Joes would be appearing in the next Transformers film, but not as a full-on crossover. The quote goes like this: "I don't look at things like a universe. I look at them as a story, and the Joes will be a part of the story. I also think the term crossover means different things for different people. For me, the Joes, whoever they are entering the world of Transformers, not combining the two worlds. The plan is to eventually do a crossover, but for the next movie, it's the Joes that are coming in for whatever the ending of Rise of the Beasts has led us to believe is possible. Oh, they will interact. We haven't developed a script yet though. What I will say is, just like we do with every other movie, it will be a team of Transformers and humans fighting the fight. The Joes will be a part of that." So much to unpack here, Justin. Firstly, what do you think about the next movie sort of featuring the Joes, but not being a full-on crossover? How do you think they can achieve that?
It'll be interesting. I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm willing to give it just about anything a shot. I mean, we always tend to go into these films with an optimistic outlook. Sometimes that doesn't pay off, but I see no reason to change that outlook now. So, I'm interested to see what they do. I think anything that gets G.I. Joe into the pop culture zeitgeist, I think, is a good thing, in spite of what a lot of folks might say. I've seen lots of hubbub online about, He-Man, the Masters of the Universe. They just announced that after $30 million of development costs, it's abandoning Netflix, or Netflix is abandoning it. And people are like, I know, just don't do the movie. And I'm just like, you don't realize how much a good movie can revitalize a brand. And we've seen it time and time again with G.I. Joe. In 2009 with Rise of Cobra, as terrible as that movie was, there was shelves, feet of product on the shelves, and it probably gave G.I. Joe a new life and let it go for another 3 or 4 years beyond what it might have otherwise, just because of that movie, which then led into Retaliation, which helped the brand for another couple of years. I would argue that the Snake Eyes movie, for whatever it is, might have played a role in G.I. Joe Classified getting the green light finally, after so many years of development or whatever. So say what you will about the Snake Eyes film. I do think that having that visible in, pop culture might have helped convince Hasbro executives to launch G.I. Joe Classified. So I think there's merit to that. So I'm all for any kind of G.I. Joe pop culture media exposure, even if that, comes kind of shackled with the Transformers film franchise, which has some questionable history, with the Bayverse stuff. There are some highlights too. And even the only thing that I'll say, if G.I. Joe comes in and is basically a glorified, Sector 7 or whatever, it's just kind of these random soldiers that happen to have G.I. Joe code names, that'll be a little bit disappointing. I'd like to see a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more care taken to that sort of thing. I'm also a little worried that it's a little too late for this kind of cameo sort of stuff. I think if they think about it the right way and approach it the right way, it could do very cool things. But time will tell whether they do think of it the right way.
One thing obviously we haven't had you on for a while, and in that time, Rise of the Beast has been out. Rise of the Beast is actually now on digital, it's on
digital. Yeah, exactly.
So cool. What was your take on that final scene? Was that something that excited you? Did you kind of go like, oh wow, when it happened? Or what was your overall thoughts with that?
Yeah, I mean, it I was definitely, I loved it. I love that they did it. I have some questions about the approach. I mean, from what we've heard from the director and some other folks, was that they had a couple of different options. You flipping the business card, it could, there's one business card that said G.I. Joe, one business card that said Sector 7. So it feels like an afterthought a little bit, I will say. But I'm glad they did. I'm glad they chose
I
GI
mean,
Joe.
you've got to be quite enthused that it was the end of the film and not a
Yes,
post-credit scene, though,
that
right?
is a good thing. Yeah, that's a much stronger lead in to what might come next, rather than kind of a tacked on thing at the end. Post credit scenes sometimes feel apologetic, like this isn't good enough to be included in the regular movie. We'll just throw it as a post credit scene.
Yeah.
Please excuse us. But putting it in the movie itself, I think, gave it a little bit of a bigger impact. From everything we've heard from the director, who's like, "Oh, I had this idea and I pitched it and they bought into it." It wasn't something that they planned and came up with organically and they built from the ground up. It was just something, oh, I had this idea. I woke
Yeah.
up with this idea and then we filmed it. And I love Michael Kelly. I
Oh,
love that they did
so
it.
awesome.
I think it could lead to some really great stuff. As always, I think it's going to come down to the execution. And so far, I think the surprise of it is great. I actually have gotten texts from friends of mine who are GI Joe fans, but they're not quite as embedded in the fandom as you and me and some others are.
I
And
don't think anyone is.
literally
Is
like,
anyone?
yeah, I know. But I got a text like literally right after somebody saw the movie, was like, oh my God, did you see the new Transformers movie? This, blew me away. They didn't know it was coming, and it was, received very positively. So
That's cool.
in that way, I think it's good, and I've seen GI Joe mentioned in more pop culture sites lately than I have in a couple of years
Yeah.
previously, just because of this ending. So I think it's
Yeah.
doing its job already, and I think there's some good potential. I think there are some missed opportunities. I think they could have thrown in some more distinctive GI Joe vehicles if that's what they were going to do, rather than this random
Yeah.
Cybertronian tech. But hey, you got to start somewhere, and if that's what we get, I'm willing to kind of live with that and see what comes out of it.
In coming back to like Lorenzo Di Bonaventura's kind of talk there about having them integrate into the next film, but
Mm-hmm.
not it's not going to be like, it's not the Transformers GI Joe movie. This is
Right.
going to be a Transformers movie, and GI Joe is going to be a an element of
Yeah.
that. Does that make you feel better about this kind of thing? Because we've talked in the past about this as if they were like a couple of months ago, we were thinking, or not even that, but like maybe a month ago, we were thinking, oh God, there's going to be a G.I. Joe Transformers crossover movie already. That feels rushed.
Mm-hmm.
This way, if they're just integrating it and it's just trickling it in and just
Yeah.
showing that they exist in this space, is that something that enthuses you a little bit more because they're kind of maybe taking it slower?
I feel better about it with that approach. Yeah, I do. Just because, I would think if they were doing a full blown crossover first, they would have to work in like a Cobra backstory. You would think with GI Joe, it just feels like it would be a little bit of a jumbled mess. I would much rather they do it like this, where the Transformers audience gets exposed to GI Joe as a concept, which
Right.
gives them the opportunity to then dive in deeper in a later film into GI Joe as its own entity, and or does a full blown kind of more integrated crossover at a later date. So yeah, I think that's the right idea.
Mm.
Just kind of showing GI Joe is a thing that exists in the Transformers world. Here it is, and then that'll lead people hopefully to be more inquisitive about it, and then in a later film, get a little bit of a deeper dive.
Yeah, and also it kind of makes me wonder just how much they'll feature in it. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
we've seen in previous Transformers movies that Sector 7 and Nest haven't always been like right at the forefront of the film.
yeah,
They've like, either dropped in here, there, a couple of places, or they have been like integrated into, it depends which movie you watch actually. But like there's so many different ways in which those kind of things, those kind of themes have been utilized.
right.
I wonder just how much we'll see a Joe in the Transformers. Also, how we'll see them, what they'll be like. Is it going to
Mm-hmm.
be like kind of futuristic? Is it going to be just military based? Is it going to be a mixture of both? Are we going to get characters in there? Is it going to be distinctive designs, or is it going to be they're just going to have names attached to a couple of
Yeah,
military guys? Because that's another thing. Like you even look at some of the Joe movies and they're effectively just generic military guys
yeah,
with names attached to them. Look at Retaliation. They killed off everyone.
yeah,
And in that first part, it was like Clutch and Grunt and,
yeah. They all the
but and
same
rock and roll.
camouflage
And
and
yeah,
whatever tech vests and stuff like that. And it was
exactly.
really
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a risk you take, is that by having them kind of feature in this way, you do risk that they are just Soldier 1 through Soldier 10 that happen to share GI Joe code names. Um, uh, I would like to think that the attitude has changed somewhat since the MCU and to a much lesser degree the DC universe have kind of exploded on the scene and haven't been afraid to showcase actual costumes, masks, uniforms, stuff like that. I would hope that would help convince them that you can get a little fancier with GI Joe. Although the Snake Eyes film, he didn't really wear his suit until like the last 30 seconds.
That's
So
12 seconds, yeah.
yeah, so you never know, but I would really hope, especially if they do feature a character like Snake Eyes, who knows if they will, that he would actually look like Snake Eyes and that it wouldn't be like a bunch of people running around in random camouflage uniforms that you can't really tell from one another.
That's what I do worry about,
Yeah,
because you
me too.
kind of want it to be a little bit more authentic.
Right.
And yeah, and considering we haven't had precedent to see it, like, yeah, kind of
Yeah,
makes you think, are they
that's a
just going to do the
tricky
same thing?
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. Because if you're going to showcase like Scarlet for the first time in a Transformers movie, and she jumps out in like olive green and beige, unitard or whatever, and the audience is like, "What the heck why
Well,
is she dressed like this?
yeah,
Is she a gymnast or a soldier?" You
yeah.
got to kind of walk that line. But I would think with like the texturing that they can do, they could make some pretty cool body armor that kind of resembles Scarlet's vintage look. That gives them that little technical edge. But
Personally, I don't think they're going to go even that deep
right,
with
probably
designs. I
not.
think you'll get that thing where you'll see like concept art of
Yeah,
stuff, and it'll be like relatively generic, but like on the edge of being a bit crazy and sci-fi. But then all of them will follow
yeah,
that particular kind of vibe. I
yep,
don't think I think the most recognizable character you'll see in there will be someone with like Snake Eyes or something,
yeah,
like
yeah.
something like that. And I again, like, they haven't written anything yet, by the way. There's
Right.
nothing written. I mean, the Transformers movie the follow-up hasn't been written, but
No.
it sounds like it's been greenlit, which is
Yeah.
a bonus.
That is
So
good. I was a
we know
little
it's
worried about the
coming.
financial performance of Rise of the Beast, but as
Yeah, didn't it do like it did well on the first weekend? Like the first
yeah,
like opening weekend did really well. It was number one, and then dropped off a cliff.
yeah,
And then domestically picked up over time, but then globally did really well.
right.
So I didn't see the final numbers, but
I
it
always
seemed,
get a little skittish when it goes to digital like a month after theatrical. That's when are they trying to just recoup their money as much as possible? But
yeah,
if it's been greenlit and if it did pretty well internationally, I think that's good enough. And I know Bumblebee didn't do gangbusters either, but
no,
apparently enough to warrant a follow up. So I think they're still searching for that magic formula to kind of make Transformers a juggernaut again. So I think I would hope that, and that's a bonus too, is that kind of attaching GI Joe to Transformers. I could see GI Joe fans being like, well, you're just riding the Transformer skirt sort of, but so what?
yeah,
I'm willing. It's $1 billion industry. It's we saw some metrics at one point about I think it was like the top 20 highest earning intellectual properties globally, and Transformers is number 18. I mean, it's
yeah.
not a slouch. It's $1 billion industry worldwide, and if GI Joe needs to hop on the edge of that skirt and ride it a little bit to get in the public eye, I'm okay with it.
We
Yeah, buckle up.
it's
Yeah, I'm okay.
I find it funny that there's this almost like three gangs. It's like like completely Transformers. Then you got the people that like both, which I
Mm-hmm.
would put myself in that. I'm a
Oh yeah,
big
me
fan of
too.
both
Me too.
brands, and I feel like I'm surprised that isn't a bigger thing because of the time period they were both out and everything. Anyway,
Yeah, I mean,
and then you've
go
got
ahead.
the Die Hard Joe. So you've got Die
Yeah.
Hard Transformer, Die Hard Joe, and they don't want anything to do with each other. And then
Yep.
this little segment in the middle that like it all.
And I think it also lends to sort of the attitude of that group of fandom. Like, I mean, there's a group of GI Joe fandoms that are hardcore military. They play Call of Duty. They like their realistic machine guns. They read the comic devoutly. Every time Larry Hama mentioned an actual weapon or military strategy, they were all over it. There were people that joined the military because of GI Joe. I mean, there is that angle, and the people who are into the hardcore realistic military who love GI Joe from 1982 to 1986 and nothing beyond, they're not going to be appreciative of the Transformers elements of those fandoms.
Yeah,
The section of fans who, which is interesting because I was definitely a comic guy. I wasn't much of a Sumbo cartoon guy, but I still like the sci-fi elements of GI Joe. So I'm more open to the Transformer side of things because I think that meshes with that science fiction element. But the real world military guys who, even though GI Joe had jetpacks and laser guns in 1982, seem to think that it was hyper real in '82 and fell off a cliff in '87. Um, which is bizarre because they had
Yeah.
Masters of Disguise with holographic projectors and all that stuff in '84. But I digress. Those folks aren't receptive to the Transformers elements working their way in, whereas folks like you and I who kind of like the futuristic stuff. I know you're a big Sunbow fan. There's a lot of folks out there that are huge Sunbow fans, deservedly so.
Yeah.
They are more willing to see Transformers kind of influence the GI Joe mythology, and even though I'm not as much of a Sunbow guy, I still love those science fiction elements.
Yeah.
And I like you cutting me off now.
Yeah. And this interview is over.
And Transformers, I like Transformers too. So I don't have a problem with the two coexisting at all.
I know. No, I find it odd that there's such a well, like I don't know. I just find it weird that the two don't always necessarily kind of mesh in that way with the fandom. Like I feel like the crossover has been pretty like so it's been done so many times since the 80s.
I mean, it's been started in the 80s. Yeah, the Marvel Comics did
exactly
the initial crossover. Yeah,
and I guess maybe to some degree there's that feeling of if you're a Transformers only collector, you feel like it doesn't need to cross over with GI Joe, and then the GI Joe fans are like they just don't want that to happen,
right?
For whatever kind of personal reasons.
Transformers fans are notorious for well, no, I won't say notorious because
they're all the same. Just lumping them together.
A lot of them are very Transformers are characters. You don't need humans to complement the Transformers. If you develop the Transformers themselves correctly, then you don't need humans to inject this personality or whatever that the films seem reliant to do. So there's some resistance to having the human influence on the Transformers universe. They think the Transformers themselves are good enough characters that they can carry the world on their own. So every time they see a human kind of interact, they're like, we don't need GI Joe. Keep them out. Transformers should be able to exist on their own.
I mean, I did have that feeling a little bit myself, but it was because the human characters. It wasn't anything to do with the fact that I didn't want them coexisting.
Sure.
Because some of the best stories come out of the fact that they're hidden in like the Earth, basically. The whole G1 concept works for me. Like they crash land millions of years later.
Yeah, the robots in disguise. I mean,
all that kind of stuff. Like that's cool, and it was like they were hiding in plain sight, whatever, and all that good stuff. And obviously there were human elements that in that era and in the movie and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's a matter of the human element in general. I think it's just a poorly written human element, which seems to have been continued. And if all the focus is on it, it does. That's what's happened with the Transformers movies. Yes, they've been super successful, but it's been about humans, and they've just been there as well. They've just been in the background.
Yeah, I can't even remember which movie it was. If it was the second of there's the one of the movie where like the female human character actually like defeated Megatron, like a 20-year-old girl beated, and even if it was male or female or whatever, people don't want to. The Transformers fans aren't going to a movie to see, the humans beat up the Transformers. I mean, it's kind of and I know Shia LaBeouf has saved almost every movie single-handedly. When Optimus Prime couldn't quite do it. There's I think another movie I can't remember, and this is kind of the problem with Transformers. I remember these moments, but I couldn't tell you which movie they're from, where Optimus Prime gets killed and Shia LaBeouf's character gets killed and goes and meets like the Transformers
the
gods
primes.
Or whatever, the primes. They give them the Matrix, and he brings Optimus Prime back to life and saves the day. And it's like, you can see elements where you're like, can you just let the Transformers win, instead of relying on these humans to always save the day. And I know it's humans watching the movies, but still, you got to think there's a different way they can go about that. So I definitely do agree with you on that point.
I just like the idea with GI Joe that it was like the Transformers battle that kind of comes to Earth, and things like in the aftermath of the first storyline, the Joes end up getting the Cybertronian, or the Cobra gets the Cybertronian technology. Joes get Cybertronian technology and that kind of stuff. I just thought, that's interesting. It's a cool way around it. But in any case, I don't expect to see that in the films. I expect to see what we've seen many other times in the movies.
What I believe is it's going to be a Transformers movie, like the Transformers movies have been happening since 2007. human influence, where it used to be Sector 7 or Nest is now going to be G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
We can hope that they get a little bit more clever with the characters and not just generic Soldier 1, 2, and 3. But I think setting proper expectations. So I don't think my hope is that people don't go into this next film thinking we're going to see fleets of Sky Strikers like
we've changed, man.
Bombing and stuff like that.
We've changed. We're so jaded now. It's like let's temper everyone's expectations. It's gonna be crap. All right.
It'd be nice to see Megatron take a hiss form or something like that. I mean, kind of tie in some of that stuff. I mean, I would like to think that would at least be occurring to them.
That would be cool
to do stuff like that, but. You don't know kind of how those Hollywood producers kind of think and whether they really appreciate that sort of aspect of it. But
obviously, it's going to be Megatron G2, and then obviously
is the tank. Yeah,
obviously it's going to be the castle. Was it the Destro's castle? Obviously, that's going to happen. Obviously.
Yeah.
No, anyway, Justin, thank you, mate, for joining me and chatting about this. Obviously, we're going to have more of these now that we're back to normal. I know you've had a bit of a reprieve, but you're back in the game, so that's good.
Absolutely.
And we'll be talking about any of these like little stories that pop up. And yeah, we'll be kind of reporting on them in this way, in this fashion. I hope everyone enjoys them.
Let's hope the studios start paying the writers so they can actually start working on a script.
That's a whole conversation, isn't it? Maybe next week we could talk about how we feel the strike is going to affect the movie and what the movie's going to look like. We could probably do it. We could probably do it ourselves because that's exactly what happened with the previous strikes.
Yeah, exactly.
The timing always around a G.I. Joe project, isn't it? Unbelievable. Anyway, thank you, mate. Much appreciated.
No problem.
We'll have you on the next one, of course. That's it for this installment of the Full Force News Burst. Thank you to my awesome co-host, Justin Bell. See you next time. And as always, after 3, 1, 2, 3,
Full Force!
And roll out.
I added that in. That wasn't
I cheated. That's it for this installment of the Full Force Movie News Burst. Don't forget to comment, like and subscribe. See you next time, and as always, Full Force. Make sure you get involved with the discussion by liking, sharing and commenting on these videos, and as always you can keep up with the show after listening by following on Twitter @TheFullForce, liking the Facebook page facebook.com/TheFullForce, and if you would like to contact the show you can message us on either of those platforms with feedback and questions. We also have a Patreon page, so if you want to show your support for the show, see your name up in lights on these videos, or enjoy exclusive bonus content, then check out patreon.com/TheFullForce podcast, or click on the link on any of the posts this podcast appears in. Full Force!